Welcome everyone to this episode of the Thinking Reform podcast. My name is Luke Saint. Thanks everyone for tuning in. This episode is brought to you by Future of Christendom. Head over to futureofchristendom.org and see the events we have coming up. We have a conference coming in October with Jeff Durbin as our plenary speaker, and Eli. I always forget to say how to pronounce his last name, Eli Ayala. Oh, I always mess up his last name. So sorry about that, Eli. But let me just the conference. Let me just get the details right now. The conference is October 9th through 11th in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Name of the conference is No Other Name, The Supremacy of Christ Amidst Cults and Counterfeit Faiths. This is Thursday, October 9th, 2025, 12 p.m. through Saturday, October 11th, 2025, 12:30 p.m. We're hoping to also do a debate at this conference as well. Chris and I are hoping to get to atheists to debate about the existence of God, and I believe that was at least the starting thesis: the Christian God exists. So we will have Jeff Durbin there, and I always forget how to pronounce his last name, Eli Ayala or something like that. I'm really sorry about that, Eli. It's hard for me to pronounce your last name. So just wanted to tell everyone about that upcoming conference. We also have another conference, Abolish Abortion PA Camp Out, July 18th to 19th in Friedensburg, Pennsylvania. So that'll be next weekend. And it's a special conference and camp out put on by Abolish Abortion Pennsylvania at St. John's Reformed Church in Schuylkill County. So head over to futureofchristendom.org to learn more about these upcoming events. I know I look forward to our Future of Christendom conference every year. Last year was a really great one. We had a debate about immigration, and I still talk about immigration to this day because I think it's one. It's a topic that has a lot of artificial attention placed on it by Christians who are advocating for the state to abuse its responsibility so that we can have protection or freedom. I mean, not freedom, definitely not freedom. It's definitely not on one of the talking points about the immigration debate from Christians. It's about security, really. And one of the reasons I talk about immigration a lot is because it is such. I mean, a lot of Christians are agreed on their desire for the state to abuse its function, the state to abuse its responsibility, the state to, they want the state to abuse the responsibility of punishing those who do evil and praising those who do good. They want to punish those who do good, and they want to praise those who do evil. That's what they want the state to do. They want the state to punish those who do good. So this is a podcast done by a guy I know, Jay Antelo, I think is how you pronounce his last name. But the name of his YouTube or his podcast is Providence Perspective, and he invites a friend of his named Lucas, I think it's Curcio, whose father's an Italian immigrant, and I think Jay is also from a family of, I believe, Puerto Ricans. He says in the podcast himself he was born in Puerto Rico. So these are two men from Christian men who are from immigrant backgrounds, talking about a biblical view of immigration. That's the name of this episode here. So I'm just going to let them talk, and they're very level-headed. There's nothing outrageous said in this. There's nothing crazy, but I believe that it's worth noting where the ideas come from and where our ideas should come from. And I'm going to try and at least address some of the faults, I believe, the faults of the reasoning behind why two very level-headed Christians will come to the conclusions that they do. So let's take a look at this here, and let's listen to what they have to say, and we'll get into it. So here it is from Providence perspective.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get into today's topic, because as we were talking about it before we got started here, it's something that it is being discussed. Right, there's a political atmosphere on immigration and foreigners, and what do we do with this from a biblical perspective, right? I feel like a lot of Christians are sort of like separating the biblical perspective into all of life and saying, well, this is a secular matter, right? Like how the state or how the nation handles immigration. But I do think that there needs to be a biblical principle behind everything that we do. And so us as Christians, we should be thinking biblically. So what would you say most Christians believe about immigration? Like from your point of view?
Another beautiful.
Here he goes. He gives he cheekily gives an advertisement right as we're about to get into the meat of the podcast. Okay, so I just want to pause it there because he said, I believe we should think biblically about this. And that's what I'm trying to address, is that in this podcast, they bring up some points that I think are just not biblical at all.
Yeah, unfortunately, unbiblical views of immigration. A lot of emotionalism is attached to this because the church in America has done a really good job at manipulating people's emotions when it comes to this exact issue, where it basically comes down to is like, you don't want to throw these people out of our country, right? And then if you do this, it's going to hurt them. It's sad. The Bible says that we should care and love our neighbor. Think of the Good Samaritan, and you're automatically met with this guilt where it's like, we got to care for these people. And they even try to say that if you want to be pro-life, that includes all of life. And so a lot of emotional, manipulation comes down to this. So people, they're not thinking biblically and even logically, and they're not even thinking naturally how God has us work naturally. When you look at even the home, we clearly have a delineation of who's allowed in our home and who is not. And we recognize the reason for that because we have to love our home first with those in our local vicinity. And if I let certain people in, I'm just going to overcrowd my home, and it's going to be dangerous to my family. And,
the comparison of the home to the country, I don't think is an appropriate comparison because, first off, the nation is not the home of the magistrate. This is not the magistrate's home. Okay, he's not the dad. Okay, the citizens don't have a mommy and daddy that make all the rules for us and tell us what our curfew is and tell us what we eat for breakfast and provide for us and care for us and make sure we read our Bibles before we go to bed. We don't live like that. We can't compare immigration to who do you let into your house because it falls apart right away as soon as you examine it. The state doesn't. This is not the state's house. They don't get to determine who comes in and who leaves, right? That's not their responsibility given to them by God to control the thoroughfare of the nation's borders. It's not their responsibility. Nowhere in Scripture does it say you need to know who's coming in and who's going. That's important. You need to know because if you don't know, it's never a problem in the Bible. The foreigner is a problem. Your own people are a problem. But the state not knowing your birth certificate and your tax ID number and your social security number and who you are and where you're from, that's never a problem in the Scriptures. They were able to maintain order and peace without stopping and accosting everybody who wanted to come to Israel and ask them, why are you here and what are you doing here and do you swear to be a good boy while you're here? So the comparison of the government, this is the government's house, right? This is our house. And we need to treat it like we need to know who's coming in. Obviously, for your house, yes. But that's your private property. You are allowed to regulate the thoroughfare of your private property, but the state is never given that responsibility, right? The church also doesn't operate in that way, right? They don't accost everyone who comes into the church and ask them who you are and what are you doing here and justify yourself. Are you a Christian? You're gonna cause problems? Let me see some ID. We don't do that. We don't live like that in our church, right? So the comparison is not I don't think is an appropriate one, because again, a father, if you compare it to your house, a father is allowed to basically make up any rule that he wants because this is property. You can make up whatever rules that you want for the people who live on your property. I mean, sometimes it won't be reasonable. Sometimes it'll be dumb rules, but it's your property. You can do whatever you want with your property, basically. And I'm not saying that every rule that you make up is good. Some of them will be sinful, but it's not. It's part of your responsibility as a mother and father to regulate what your children are doing. It's not the state's responsibility to regulate us. That's not what they're there for. Okay, parents take care of their children. The state doesn't take care of us, the citizens. They don't do that. All right, they give us justice, and only justice shalt thou pursue. Right, as it says there in Deuteronomy. That's their responsibility. Give us justice. When we go to them and say, hey, I'm bringing this man to court because he wronged me, and here's how he wronged me. The state's like, okay, here's the solution, and then that's it. They're not there for curfew. That's not their responsibility. So we cannot give the responsibility of the father over to the state and say, oh, it's the same thing. They have the same responsibility, because they really don't.
People they don't start with the Bible. They start with emotions because they've been prone.
I submit to you that the argument about the house, like we don't let anyone into our house, that doesn't start. It's not an argument that starts with the Bible. You don't go to the Bible for that one.
To approach this emotionally, and you also nobody wants to be looked at as a bad guy, right?
Right.
You don't want people thinking you're this bad guy who just wants to kick Johnny down the street out from his house and rip him apart from his family. We want to be seen as this nice person, and so we just want to take the side of justice, right? And usually that always goes towards the left side, not the right side of justice, or the biblical side of justice.
Right.
The left doesn't. I mean, even though a lot of what people argue for when it comes to free immigration, a lot of it sometimes sounds like a leftist talking point. But you're a fool if you think the left is serious about what they're saying. They're not serious. The reason they're saying what they're saying is because the right is saying the opposite. If the right switched tomorrow and said we need free immigration, the left would say, hold on, let's get the walls up. I swear that to you. I promise you. They do not have conviction about that. I say this all the time on this podcast. They just care where they are convicted, where they will not change, even if the right disagrees with them or agrees with them. This is irrelevant to them on 2 points only. 2 points only. One, you should have the freedom to be a sexual pervert. Right? Whether the right disagrees with them or not, they're not going to change that. That's always going to be the same. You should be a sexual pervert. You should have the freedom to be a sexual pervert, and being a sexual pervert is good, right? The second one is we should be able to kill babies, right? So even if the right turns around and says, oh, we should be able to kill babies, the left would be like, yes, agreed. The rest of them are incidental and consequential. They have no conviction about them whatsoever. Sure, there might be individuals involved, but party platform talking points from the left side, there's only 2 that are out of conviction. I contend that there are only 2. One is to be the freedom to be a sexual pervert and the celebration of sexual perversion. The second is to the right to kill your baby. Those 2 things are the only thing that they're going to stand on and say, no matter what the right believes, we're going to believe the same thing on this. Everything else is completely incidental and is totally based off what the right says. Everything else that they argue for, everything. I think even race. They have no conviction about that at all. They're all racists themselves. Frankly, they're absolutely racists. So if you're like, oh, you're worried about arguing for free immigration, I might sound like a leftist. That is just incidental. That's completely incidental. They don't care about immigrants. They don't care about freedom of traveling. They do not care about that kind of stuff at all. That is completely incidental. They stumble blindly into this talking point just because of where the right is. And you know, there might be an argument, or probably is an argument in there, because they want votes and all that kind of stuff. They can buy immigrants, but that's where it's coming from. It's not a place of conviction.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, you said something like you want to be seen as like the nice guy, or like not the bad guy, right? And I remember when I was younger, you know, as a young Christian, there was some people in college preaching. I think it was a true gospel, if I think about it, you know, far back enough, right? But I do remember seeing them talking a lot about sin and repentance and the need for that. And I was one of those idiots that stood in front of them and said, look, I don't disagree with you, but this is not the way to do it. Right. And it wasn't like, you know, it wasn't like, what's that church, Westboro Baptist Church?
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't any of that. They're like just telling people they're going to go to hell and they're going to burn in hell. No, it's just like straight up, just like, hey, you need to repent, right? You have sin. God can forgive your sin. Like, it was very biblical, right? And I was a young Christian, still maybe a year or less into the faith, and I was just sort of not arguing with them, but giving them pushback, right? Like saying, like, guys, I get it, you know, I don't disagree. Yes, we need repentance, but really just talk about Jesus's love. You know, I think that's what people really need to know, that Jesus loves them.
Yeah.
And you know, I kind of cringe looking back on that, but it's pretty much what I've sort of seen with the whole immigration thing as well. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, 100%. Again, like nobody wants to be looked at as a bad guy. Like Vodi Bakum says, like, you know, the 11th commandment, right? That
Thou
it's
shalt be
made,
nice.
yeah, it's made up. We think it's biblical. Thou shalt be nice. Where people think that, you know, they're taught this. They're taught that being a Christian means you're the most least offensible person in the world.
Right.
And if you offend somebody, you're doing Christianity wrong. You're not following Jesus. And if we hold even Jesus to that standard, Jesus wasn't a good Christian, because Jesus, you know,
Right.
offended people.
Right.
Clearly, he offended people. Clearly, Jesus was, you know, the world viewed Jesus as an enemy. Hence why they crucified him.
Right.
And so if you act like that, if you be like that, then you're doing it wrong. And you can't tell people about their sin. You got to be friendship evangelism all the way through and through. You got to just earn it. You got to love on people first, and you just got to keep. Trying to be as nice as possible, because if you offend them, you're doing it wrong, and you need to just get in line. So I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, I like the way that Doug Wilson put it when he was in Ligonier, actually, years and years ago, when Ligonier still was friendly with Doug Wilson. he had said everybody wants to imitate Jesus, except when he makes a whip and cleanses the temple.
So
right?
true.
Not like that, right? Like that only Jesus can be that way, but us, no. So what would Jesus do? Well, it depends, right? Don't do that part of Jesus. So it's kind of funny, because like that's really what it comes down to. So let me ask you this: what would you say is the actual, or at least how do you think that we can get to a more biblical view of immigration? What would you say maybe is your view of immigration? Where do you find biblical support? And how do you think that people can start working their way towards a more biblical view of immigration?
Yeah, so I would say off the top of my head is it has to be lawful. And we really got to get this right, because illegal immigration is breaking the law.
I mean, my problem here is, you know, how do we get back to a more biblical view? Right. This is an issue of mine, of what's said here. How do we get back to a more biblical view of immigration? And the first thing is, well, it's got to be lawful. Okay, but whose law, right? The state's law? Is it immoral because the state just said you can't do it? And is God going to judge us by government immigration law on the last day? Does he frown on us when we don't ask the civil magistrate the baby murdering, sodomy glorifying civil magistrate if I can live in the country and justify myself to them? Is that like a strike against us? Is that viewed as sin? Sin is lawlessness, but that's not man's law. It's God's law, right? And so if the question is, how do we get back to a more biblical view on immigration? And the response is, well, it's got to be lawful. Okay, whose law? Because God doesn't place a burden upon someone who wants to buy property who does not live in that country. He does not place the burden of the purchaser, place a burden on the purchaser to justify his intention, his motive, his purpose, his tax ID, his length of stay. He does not need to justify himself to the magistrate at all. God places no burden. If I want to buy country in the not a country. What was that? Yesterday we were men without a country. Today we need to decide what country we want to buy. That's Die Hard with a Vengeance. Die Hard 3 there. That was what's his name? Guy who played Scar. I can't remember his name. Jeremy. Oh, why is his name failing me? Anyway. Oh, Hollywood fail. When I decide to purchase land in another country, all right, let's say I want to purchase land in, Rwanda. Is a Christian really going to come up to me and say, well, you need to check with the magistrate first, or else God's going to be displeased with you? If that's true, and I've heard people say this, then every time you break the speed limit, you're sinning. But we all know that's not true. Nobody believes that. Nobody believes that at all. You've broken 30 laws yesterday. I can almost promise you that, as I've said before on this podcast. When we did our conference a couple months ago on non-legislative theonomy, we did mock cases, and one of them was my neighbors being really loud, and one of my friend from Governed by God podcast, Eric, what's his last name? What's his name? Eric Leupold. While we were going through the case, he looked up the laws in Lancaster County, I believe, or maybe it was a township. And he found out that anything over 59 decibels, I think it was 58 decibels, I think. Anything over, if they're standing on your property line and the inspector picks up sound over 58 decibels, you are in violation of ordinance, town ordinance. That's before, I think it's 10 p.m. After 10 p.m., you're not allowed to make a sound, again, if the person's standing on the property. If you have a huge property, it doesn't really matter, right? Because the sound won't get out to the property line. But if you're in the city and, you have these small property areas, you have these small lots, if your neighbor holds out a decibel reader and he picks up a sound above 52 decibels, if he picks up a sound above 52 decibels, you are in violation of breaking town ordinance. You've broken a law. And you're subject to fine, and even I think it is a maximum is time in prison. And he looked up too. Eric looked up what is the average sound of a conversation. A conversation between two people, the average sound is 60 decibels. 60 decibels. So if you have a conversation with a friend at 10 p.m. at night, and your neighbor can hear what you're saying, you are in violation of town ordinance. You've broken a law. Nobody thinks that's a sin. Nobody. I mean, maybe you could find some sort of independent fundamentalist Baptist church somewhere that's like every single law that's put into place, yes, is the voice of God. Romans 13, that's God's law. You need to follow it or else you're in sin. Maybe you can find some crazy nuthead out there saying that. But nobody believes God's going to be like, well, you broke the town ordinance. right? But if you want to be lawful, you have to follow that law, right? But are you in sin if you break that law? Everyone's going to say, no, you're not. So my question is, are we in sin if we don't report ourselves to the magistrate and we come into a country illegally and just live there without reporting ourselves? As it was for a long time in America, you didn't have to report yourself to anyone. If you wanted to come and live here, you had no government entity to report yourself to. Maybe you did if you wanted to become a citizen, but to just come live here and the state didn't know who you were, completely irrelevant for the first 100 years of this nation. Did not have to report yourself. First immigration law, 1875, Page Act. But until then, there was no quota. There was no sign here. Here's your tax ID information. You just came and you bought land and that was it. Now, I do believe the magistrate often would be like, oh, I'm curious and I want to know. I'm sure they question people or what have you. I'm sure everyone did that, not just the magistrate, right? Because you always want to know who your neighbors are and who's around you. But it was never a law. So if it has to be lawful, which law are we going with? Because God's law places no burden upon the immigrant to report himself to the magistrate when he wants to buy land from somebody. Not a burden. So in my opinion, this discussion was like, how do we be more biblical? We're starting off of the Bible. We're not starting on the Bible. We're starting off the Bible. And this is already going the wrong direction.
And we cannot have that. Like, if you want to immigrate to a country, do it legally. And only really recently has it been, kind of like the rhetoric, every vote counts. What's the other thing they say? Like, nobody's illegal or something like that. Well, if nobody's illegal, then there's no law. If there's no law, then there's just anarchy and chaos.
Like I said, the category of illegal immigrant wasn't around until the 1870s in America. Did we have anarchy? I mean, we all know, no, obviously not. I mean, most of us would say it probably had more peace back then, right? But we didn't have immigration laws. We didn't have there was no such thing as illegal immigration, as far as I know. From what I've uncovered or from what I've been exposed to historically, from my research, I've seen no immigration. The first immigration law, 1875. So was there chaos? We all know there wasn't. We'd all say, actually, it was a better time back then. I mean, a much more Christian and biblical time. And a lot of people look back longingly at the values and the morals of that time. And we all, for the most part, declared superior to our own time. Yet there was no such thing as illegal immigration. So where are we getting this idea that just because you come to a nation illegally, that means you have no law and no order? Biblical law does not cause you to report yourself to the magistrate. There's no immigration law in Scripture. You could live in Israel and never report yourself to the magistrate at all. If you want to be part of the assembly, which is not our understanding of citizenship, which is not our understanding of immigration, not the same thing. If you wanted to be part of the assembly, yes, there were certain things you had to do. Then you kind of did have to justify yourself. But just to live there, you didn't need to justify yourself. You want to purchase land? Land's going back to the original owner in 50 years anyway. So, no, just because, I mean, we have so many people. I would submit to you that most of the people who come to this nation do so illegally. And the only place that there's chaos and anarchy is in the big cities run by these idiot Democrats.
Chaos. I think.
And just one further point on that. The most chaos that we had in this nation in recent memory was during the 2020 COVID riots. That was not done by immigrants. I'm sure there was immigrants in there, but those were citizens. Those were red, yellow, black, and white. Half of it was done for the opportunity. Half of it was done on the principle of the matter. So, with all the immigration going on, we're still not as bad as the COVID riots and the mostly peaceful protests. Maybe in some places in LA it's just as bad. But remember, those COVID riots were all over the country.
Think of Romans 13 immediately, where government is set up by God it's his servant to do good. It carries a sword. The church has the keys to the kingdom. The government has a sword, and it's purposely to put down evil, and that includes first and foremost those who are breaking God's law. So it ought to be legal.
Yeah, right. I agreed there. You know, those who are breaking God's law, but God's law never requires you to report yourself to the magistrate. God's law does not allow the magistrate to make up new rules about who comes to the nation. Just not something that God has given to the magistrate, a responsibility, an authority. None of that is given to the magistrate for him to make up new rules about who's allowed to come to the nation. He's not our protector. He's not our provider. He's not our security. He is the man who gives us justice when we go to him for justice. That's his responsibility. So, immigration, you know, like Romans 13, if you want to talk about Romans 13, it's punishing those who do evil. Not when evil is not defined by the magistrate. Sin is lawlessness, God's law, right? The magistrate is God's servant to bring God's wrath on those who violate God's law, right? So if you make a new law saying, hey, I know God's law doesn't say you have to report yourself to me, but I'm saying you have to report yourself to me because of, you know, some make up whatever reason you want to. You have to report to me and you have to justify yourself. You have to answer my questions, and then you have to wait until I give you a certificate of approval. That's not God's law. That's not God's law. All right? I agree with him here. The magistrate is supposed to punish those who violate God's law, but God's law doesn't have immigration law. So I think this point is missed here.
And we have to get this right, that if somebody is here illegally, that's unlawful. And I would even argue
It's unlawful according to man's law, but it's not unlawful according to God's law. I don't think he makes the connection here. He doesn't tie this back to Scripture. He just says, you know, Romans 13, punish those who break God's law, but God's law doesn't have immigration laws.
if it's on a mass scale, then that's equivalent to an invasion.
Right.
Most definitely, it's absolutely tantamount to an total invasion. Like, what else do you call that? You have a bunch of people, especially a bunch of men, recently just coming over our border. It's illegally. They know it. It's intentional. It's on purpose. Well, that's called an invasion, whether they're carrying AK-47s or not. And so,
Let's see. What is that? Let's see here. Let's see. I always forget these. It's is it Isaiah 15? Oh, it's Isaiah 16. There it is. Okay. Send the lamb to the Isaiah 16 verse 1. Send the lamb to the ruler of the land from Selah by the way of the desert, like the mount of the daughter of Zion, like fleeing birds, like a scattered nest. So are the daughters of Moab at the fords of the Arnon. Give counsel, grant justice, make your shade like night at the height of noon. Shelter the outcasts, do not reveal the fugitive. Let the outcasts of Moab sojourn among you, be a shelter to them from the destroyer. Now, either this is, I think traditionally this is understood as Israel fleeing to Moab. Reading it, just in its context right now, it sounds like the Moab's fleeing to Israel. The outcasts of Moab, right? Like fleeing birds, like a scattered nest, so are the daughters of Moab at the fords of the Arnon, right? It sounds like Moab's fleeing to Israel, but I think the traditional understanding from the commentaries I've read, this is actually Israel fleeing to Moab. Either way, that's a lot of people at a lot of time. Is that an invasion? I think we'd all say no. I think there are many times in history where there would, if a whole country was allowed to flee to a different nation, then they would. I think that's happened before in history. Fugitives can sometimes outnumber an army. So it's not always, by definition, It's not always by definition an invasion, just because suddenly you get a huge influx of military-aged men. In my opinion, any argument for disallowing a large number of people to, immigrate to your country at the same time is an argument against the right to peaceably assemble. The same argumentation could be used. Well, you're not allowed to peaceably assemble because we don't know who you are. You might have guns. You might just turn this into something of a riot, and you might start killing people. So you're not allowed to peaceably assemble. Yet nobody argues for the dissolution of the right to peaceably assemble. So you can get together a crowd of 1 million people, and as long as you keep it peaceful, the state will let you do it, ostensibly. But I don't see anyone arguing for the dissolution of the right to peaceably assemble. But any argument that you make for, well, we can't let a big group of people come in here, it's also an argument against the right to peaceably assemble.
If we can make a strong delineation between illegal immigration, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Countries cannot have that whatsoever, and we cannot allow anybody in here illegally. And we have to realize,
I think I agree with him here. We have to realize what I would say we have to realize is, what are the people who are not coming in here legally doing? If you've ever seen the questions that these baby murdering, sodomy praising representatives of the government ask, they're dumb, they're arbitrary. You can lie your face off. You think this is like any sort of vetting process that we can put our faith and our trust in? You trust these people to properly vet out the bad people? You're concerned about rapists. They're rapists. The people asking questions, they're rapists. You're concerned about pedophiles. They're pedophiles. The people asking the questions, they're pedophiles. You're concerned about murdering our children. They murder their children. The people asking the questions. They promote this as an ideology. All these horrible things they promote as part of their job. The government promotes all these things as good. So if we don't report if we come in here illegally and we don't report ourselves to the baby murdering, pedophilic, homosexual praising government, you think that's a bad thing? I think we can all agree that's not a bad thing. Please, like, they're going to stop anything? They're not going to stop. Look, real talk. The problem demographic is the Muslims. They're the problem demographic. They're not going to stop the Muslims. They're not. Okay? That's not going to happen anytime soon. They're not going to stop the Muslims. All right? So immigration, illegal immigration, and making people immigrate legally is not going to stop the Muslims from coming in here. They're going to come in here. But that's the problem demographic. So that's legal or / illegal immigration is not the answer to the problems that we're facing in this nation. Because our government does not know how to properly vet. Even if you got a bunch of Christians in there, they don't know how to properly vet it because they swear an oath to follow the laws of the land. And the laws of the land are not Christian. So why do we want people coming in here to go to pagan people to justify themselves, to give pagan reasons to live in this pagan land? And we're like, oh, that's going to solve a problem. What problem is that going to solve? That'll stop the pagans from coming in? That'll stop the bad people? That's not going to stop the bad people. The bad people come in no matter what. When I hear these arguments, it's the same reasoning behind, well, we need to make gun laws. Well, why? Well, because if we outlaw guns, then nobody will have them. No, that's just not true. Guns are coming in here. Look at the war on drugs. We can't stop drugs from coming in. We can't stop guns from coming in. What makes you think we can stop people from coming in? Oh, this pagan, baby murdering, God hating, homosexual loving government is going to really vet people. Yeah, okay.
Two is they're not the victim. Again, if you're doing this illegally, especially if you're bringing your family over, you're causing your whole entire household to sin. That person is not a victim.
Disagree completely. You're not causing anyone to sin if you come here illegally. You're not sinning. God's not going to judge you because you didn't report yourself to his enemies, people who have declared themselves to be his enemies. God's not going to judge you for that. Not a sin. It's a made-up crime, totally made-up crime. For the first 100 years, this nation was never a problem until we kept on asking the state to abuse its authority and responsibility.
That person is a criminal by every definition, because that's what a criminal is. A criminal is somebody who breaks the law.
Right. Are you a criminal if you go 56 into 55? Are you a criminal? If you read through your town ordinance, everyone's a criminal. If you look at the code book of your local municipality, you're a criminal. We all break federal, state, local. You don't even know you're doing it most of the time. 99% of the time, you have no idea you're doing it. But you're breaking a law. You're always breaking a law somewhere. We're all criminals then. No one can keep up with the man-made law. Nobody can. Why are we focusing on this particular set of laws right here? They're not biblical, but we're like, suddenly this is the litmus test for what's sin and what isn't. We all know, we can all say with a straight face and a clear conscience, look, going 56 and 55 is not a sin, okay? It's just not, right? God's not going to judge you on the white throne all the times that you broke the speed limit. But that's the definition of a criminal, is it not, according to the state?
The law of the land in particular.
Right.
And so we have to, to get rid of this emotionalism and establish law and order, and then ought to include lawful immigration rather than illegal immigration.
Right. Absolutely. God is a God of order, right? Not a God of disorder.
Yeah.
And so how our nation does something has to be organized, right? Because God is the perfect model. I mean, if you want to do anything that relates to morality, I mean, if you don't do it the biblical way, then you're doing it the wrong way, right?
But there is no biblical way to do immigration the way that these guys are arguing for it. And I think that's their strongest tie right there. That's the best that they can do to bring it back to biblical law, is God is a God of order. And I think that's a very weak tie. Personally, with respect to these guys, I think that is completely weak and totally not theologically sustainable under cross-examination. Just not a strong tie. Like, we need to have immigration laws. Why? Because God's a God of order. Okay. All right. Maybe we need to have internet laws. Well, why? Because God's God of order. Maybe we need a representative of the government inside your house watching everything that you do, making sure you're not breaking any laws. Why? Because God's God of order, right? It's not a strong tie back to the scriptures at all. And I'm not saying this is their foundation. They're not saying this is our whole foundation. But I'm saying throughout this discussion, you're not going to find much stronger than that and vague references to some verses. But you can't tie this back to biblical law in this interview.
Right. So now I will say this, right? And this is something that people often bring up. What about welcoming the foreigner and the stranger, right? Doesn't the Bible talk about welcoming the foreigner, treating them as if they're one of our own, right? Like even in the Old Testament, you see Israel being commanded to welcome the foreigner and to treat them as an Israelite, even though there's a lot of emphasis on being separate from the other nations. At the same time, there's a lot of emphasis in welcoming them. So what do you say to somebody that brings up those kinds of objections?
I think, that's an easy one actually, because you can absolutely do that. So it's not like two sides or like, two opposite sides here. It's almost like, people do this, with homosexuality. They assume that the only way to love, the LGBT community is if you tolerate them and you accept them. And what they really mean by that is conservatives who are against LGBT, they're on the opposite side of love. They hate. So for them, it's either or. Either I accept this lifestyle or I hate them. So it's one or the other. But I would argue that conservatives do, those who are at least, truly conservative, not like, the rhinos who are now for LGBT. But so I would argue, I do, base it in reality that it's not like I don't love LGBT. I actually love them, and we ought to love them so much that we even tell them the truth and lead them to Christ. It's not that we treat them badly or poorly, but that's the same with immigration. So the opposite side of this is not, well, the foreigner, we should just hate them, just treat them in a way that Jesus wouldn't want us to treat them, because we are commanded to love them. But again, it has to go back to, well, are they here lawfully? Because with Israel, I don't have the text in front of me. None of that was in the context of what we have today, where it's like we're taking a passage in the Old Testament and we're interpreting it with our 21st century context.
Right.
Where again, all these people, are coming into our land illegally, and we just have to let them tear down in a very real way our country, hurt our country economically, even hurt people's lives. A lot of them bringing in drugs, sex trafficking. There is murder from a lot of these people, but we just have to keep our mouths shut because we're commanded, to love them. And that's just not true. They have to come in here lawfully. So it's not like two sides here, where it's either we love them.
I submit to you that even lawful immigration doesn't stop the drugs. It doesn't stop the sex trafficking. There's just as many legal people, citizens of the United States, involved with all these things as there are illegal people. I might even suggest that there are probably even more involved. The solution to sin is not the state abusing its responsibility to give people justice. That's never the solution. The problem of sin in the land, the problem of lawlessness in the land, is God's law. That's the solution. That's what the Bible is always talking about. The coastlands wait for his law. God's law is not laid down for the just, but for the unjust, for the ungodly and disobedient. And he mentions kidnappers. So, whether someone came here illegally or not is completely irrelevant to my responsibility to them, right? There might be so many people in my life, and all of our being, including these two guys' lives. Ultimately, we might interact with someone, and whether or not I know that person is legal or illegal is completely irrelevant to how I should treat them. It should also be completely irrelevant to how the magistrate treats them. If they are the victim of injustice, the magistrate's supposed to give them justice. If they are committing injustice, then the magistrate's supposed to punish them. Coming into a nation legally is not unjust. Who did you hurt? What law are you violating in God's law? How? None of this is tied back to God's law. And I submit to you, again, with respect to these two guys, because they're both fine gentlemen, I submit to you, I think yes, there is a problem of reading the scriptures in light of 21st century philosophy and reasoning, and I submit to you that these two guys are guilty of that in this podcast here.
Let them all in, or we just close our borders and just absolutely hate them. We can allow immigration, we can love them without going down the I hate you path, but we also do.
Yeah, he said we can allow them, but we can't do anything. It comes down to some knucklehead in an office, and the legislature passing laws, and then they don't represent us. So we is not really an entity. The bureaucracy. They don't represent us. Nobody thinks that they represent us. They do not represent us at all, right? They do whatever they want, whether you want them to. It's completely irrelevant. Go ahead and complain about it. Write your local congressman. See what happens. They don't care. So right. So this idea that we can do this and we can do that, it's a chasing after the wind. We can't do anything. We've created a system where we are the slave of the state. We're their slaves. And they get our money no matter what we do. They do with it what they want. And it turns out that even with all the immigration laws we have, the problem is that they're shipping in people anyway. And they're giving them money. And no amount of voting is going to change that. I'm sorry. If you think your vote still counts.
Again, have to make sure this is through law and order. Because, as you said, God is a God of law and order. He's not, again, he's not this God is like anything goes. Clearly, right. That's, even unbelievers know this. God has rules for a reason. They're good.
Yeah, and again, I bring this up. None of them are immigration rules.
Law is good, as the scriptures say.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would you say assimilation plays into all of this?
Yeah, so that is a really good question. I do think we need to have assimilation laws in America. Like, I'm gonna bring up my phone because I made a tweet a couple weeks back, and I think this is what prompted our discussion to have on this. I did a proposal for immigration laws, and I think we do absolutely need assimilation laws. So the reason why I think that is because I think multiculturalism is bad for countries, where it's everybody's just trying to bring in their own culture, and you are trying to have an actual true melting pot.
Right.
It's going to be chaotic, and also it is going to bring in other religions, and that's bad. You know, if we're going to be one nation under God, it has to be, you know, that God has to be defined, and which God, and it you know, it should be true to our American heritage, which, you know, even if there were deists out there, it was clearly leaning towards the Christian God, the God of the Bibles, or sorry, you know, the God of the Bible. So I think we have to have assimilation laws, where if somebody is purposely trying to come in here, you know, take example, you know, a Muslim, and he's trying to build a mosque, we shouldn't allow that guy in here. We're not a
Right.
Muslim country.
Right.
Allah is not God, and Islam is detrimental. You know, a lot of people are gonna get mad at me, but it's just the fact. You know, Islam is detrimental,
Correct.
and it's also a violent religion as well.
Yeah.
Historically, you know, it proves this. There's no denying this. You know, some people say, "Well, I have Muslim friends who are peaceful," and that's true, but those are the nominal Muslims. Show me a consistent Muslim, and he's going to be somebody that you ought to stay away from, and he knows that his scripture is commanding him to make war with us.
Right.
I agree with him there. You know, absolutely, 100%. And that's the problem demographic. But just, I mean, if you know anything about Islam, they're allowed to lie. They're completely allowed to lie. And when you sit them down in the interrogation room as they're legally immigrating, asking you, "Hey, can I come into your nation?" Sure, you got to answer some questions first. Okay. Are you Muslim? You think he's going to be like, yeah. If he knows that the laws of the land don't allow Muslims in, that's illegal to be a Muslim, which it's not in God's law. It's not illegal to be a Muslim civilly. It is illegal to promote a false religion and turn the hearts of the people away to other gods. That's the crime. But to be a Muslim is not a crime. The public worshiping of idols and the proselytization of those idols, the proselytization of the people, and the proclamation of false gods. That's the crime, right? So it's not a crime to be a Satanist. It's not a crime to be a Muslim. It's not a crime to be an atheist in God's law. It's immoral, right? But legally speaking, you can't be brought to court and punished because you don't believe in God. You can only be punished if you are if you're publicly, if you can get, I mean, basically it's publicly promoting a false god or publicly worshiping a false god. That's the crime. With two or three witnesses, right? So in the interrogation room, you're going to ask him all these questions, this Muslim, and he's going to be like, "Yeah, I'm a Muslim. I'm here to build mosques." Right to your face when he knows that he's not allowed to. Right? That's what's going to happen. And the guy's going to be like, "Oh, wait, what? Don't you know? No, you're rejected." You think that's what's going to happen? No, he's going to be like, "No, I'm just a normal guy. Well, your name's Muhammad." "Yeah, I know, but I'm not a Muslim." And how in the world are you or anyone going to be able to verify what he's saying? You have no idea who he is. You have no idea where he's from. He could say he's from Jordan, but maybe he's from Kuwait. He could say something from Saudi Arabia, but maybe he's from Yemen. We have no idea to verify his claims. And every charge must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. And it's just you and him in there. How are you going to verify anything? He might be an Arab Christian. How could you possibly know? And his name is Muhammad. How do you know? This vetting and legal immigration crap is so ridiculous once you play it out. Yes, the problem of building mosques and having Muslims come in is a problem. But God's law as is, without this immigration silliness that we're talking about here, already solves the problem and accounts for the problem. But when we're like, that's a good idea, God, thanks for your tips and tricks. Maybe that's better on an internet article for 7 ways to make your nation great, Lord. Thanks for your tips and tricks. But we're going to go with our little immigration system over here where we ask people, hey, are you a bad person? And they say yes, and then we say you can't come in here. Once you give the state that authority, they're going to start abusing it, of course. And then soon, I mean, does anyone think that the state, if we really wanted them to do this, that they wouldn't start, like once they found out you're from a Christian nation, that they wouldn't let you in? They would do that. If they could do that tomorrow, they would. They would say, no Christians allowed in here. That's what they would do if we gave them that authority. To be like, yeah, you can discriminate based on religion. They would discriminate against us right away. They're not allowed to, and they're already doing it. This is such a dumb idea with respect to these two guys. Of like, yeah, we need to be interviewing people because they'll tell us the truth and what they're really here for. And once we find out, we won't let them in. That is ridiculous.
So I think, we should absolutely be monoculture, one culture, not multicultural. And we ought to have assimilation laws. But behind that assimilation law is, because I said this in my tweet too, we need to define American culture. Like what is American culture? And I think we should. So in my tweet, I said we should find it as Protestant. I have thought about that since. I definitely want to define it as Protestant because we were clearly set up as a Protestant nation. But I also want to be ecumenical and realize that my Roman Catholic, and I don't know how you feel about this, Jay. You can disagree; it's fine. I do feel Roman Catholics are under the branch of Christendom. Like Maryland was set up by Catholics. So maybe instead of Protestant culture, we should find it as Christian culture. But that would encompass even Eastern Orthodoxy, even though I think a lot of Eastern Orthodoxy are really just hard-headed people. I like Roman Catholics a lot better.
I'll tell you what.
Christian culture.
With Roman Catholicism, and this is as somebody that has family that is Roman Catholic, I have a hard time with that one, man. I'm not gonna lie. It's a hard pill to swallow because, maybe it's just the Baptist in me, or I don't know what it is, but Trent just rubs me the wrong way, man. And the gospel that Catholics have, I appreciate that they affirm like the Trinity, right? That's where most heretics usually go. Like that's to me that's the first and the biggest wheel that falls off the wagon for like cults and things like that, right? Whereas Roman Catholicism, no, that's not their problem. But I'm not saying that I would not want, or I would have no Roman Catholics living in this country, but to include them as a Christian country, I would say it's more of a I lean more Protestant Christian country. But I do understand what you're saying, and I do know the history of Maryland and things like that.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, actually.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I didn't read Doug Wilson's book, Mere Christendom. Did you?
A while ago, and I'll be honest with you, I don't remember everything that it encompasses.
So I didn't read it, as I said. I do know, though, that he said in there, in relation to kind of similar around this topic, that America should, to be kind of pan-Protestant or Christian, we should put something with the Apostles' Creed either into the Constitution or as a requirement for something. So if we go by like that definition, where say to immigrate to America, you have to affirm the Apostles' Creed. Big mistake.
Huge. I mean, just a really bad idea. And again, with respect to these guys, they're not dumb people. They're not saying outrageous things. But I think once you play it out, just play it out. We institute in our Constitution that people come to this nation, not the people who live here. Okay, people who live here for some reason, they're off. They don't need to swear to this. Just the people who come here, which is again a violation of God's law that there should be one law for you and the foreigner. But let's just go with what they're saying here. Let's go with what they're saying here. Let's institute one of the confessions or one of the creeds, right? The Apostles' Creed. Right. I mean, no problem with the Apostles' Creed, right? Until the officials say, hey, let's change it, right? The Catholics get their people into power. They come here, right? Because they will. Or even, I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be Catholics. It needs to be just liberal Christians. They swear, they take the oath, right? Because we're going to have oaths of office, and we'll have, rules for only Christians can be in there. But a liberal Christian can do just as much damage as an atheist in office, sometimes even more, because people's guards are down, right? And he might say, let's get rid of that, right? Oh, well, maybe some uproar, but you know what? The Christians are too busy to living their lives to really do or worry about it. Yeah, that might be bad for my children, but as long as the evil's not in my day. And you might say, oh, that's not going to happen. Historically, that's what happened in this nation, okay? We got rid of the requirements for the politicians to be Christians. We just got rid of them. Who did that? If only Christians were allowed to take office, who were the ones that got rid of the requirements to be a Christian? Who were they? Was it atheists? Was it Catholics? So as soon as you say, okay, let's institute a creed, it's just a matter of time before someone else gets their creed in there, and now we have to swear to the Council of Trent. Now we have to swear to Vatican II. Just a bad idea. Why are we placing burdens on people that God's law never places? Historically, that's happened 100% of the time. That's always happened. We should not be asking to institute extra biblical requirements more than what God has already placed on his own people. When you come into this world and you live in this world and you travel to another country or you stay in your own home place, God never requires the magistrate to make you swear anything. Just living or moving to another place, there's no requirement. So why are we doing it? And regarding the Catholics, yes, you're allowed to be a Catholic in a Christian nation. You can be a Catholic. But just know that if you're public with what you are saying, some of the things that they say, they can get away with. Again, they're Trinitarian. But if they start going around in a lot of the countries carrying statues of Mary, that is a capital offense. Since God's law perpetually places the righteous at an advantage and those who are in sin at a disadvantage in the courtroom, if the Catholics are caught with their Mary worship, that is a capital offense under God's law. And they can say all the time, well, I'm not worshiping, I'm not venerating. Well, we'll get 2 or 3 witnesses in here who are willing to pick up stones, and we'll see what they have to say. You can say all over the place, up and down, but in a Christian nation with God's law as the standard of justice, it doesn't matter how much you say, oh, I wasn't worshiping her, I was just venerating her. It's going to come down to what's provable in court. And Catholics are not going to like that. They're not going to want to live here. But that's God's law as it is. It scares away wicked people when it's the law of the land and invites righteous people who want to live righteously. That's what it does. That's how immigrants are regulated under God's law. Because if you want to be an immigrant and you want to come here and you want to cause trouble, you will be killed. You will be forced into indentured servitude. You will be punished for the crimes that you commit against this people. It's dangerous to do wickedness in a righteous society. That's how God's law sets up the society. That it's safe to be righteous and it's dangerous to be wicked. That's the way that God's law sets it up. When we reject his standards and we try to do our own, then it becomes dangerous to be righteous and it becomes safe to be wicked, as it is right now. So instituting a creed or confession, 1, is never required by God's law. 2, is not going to age well because historically speaking, we tried that. It didn't work. The politicians who are in power, just like, okay, let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of the requirements. Hey, if you give them the power to put the requirements in, you've given them the power to take them out and put their own requirements in there, which is why people are swearing on stacks of pornography.
By definition, that would allow Catholics in, It would even allow Eastern Orthodox in, even Oriental Orthodox in, or we can even
See, under God's law, you won't be worried about who's coming and who's not. This group of people over here. It comes down to who is committing idolatry and who's promoting idolatry. That can happen among Christians too, among cults, right? That can happen among them too. So God's law always is addressing the root of the problem, and it never allows the fruit to grow.
say, okay, what about the Nicene Creed? You could also affirm that in addition or in lieu of this. That would also once more allow Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox in. So
until the Eastern Orthodox get into power and they take out the filioque clause.
The bare minimum, though, I want us to be defined as Christian culture, because that's the prelude to assimilation. It's like, okay, if we're gonna say immigrants have to assimilate, well, what are they assimilating to?
Right.
Now we can be hard-headed and be like these woke Rikers, as I call them, but I mean woke right,
Sure.
and say Heritage America. I think that's going to destroy America. Actually, we can talk about that later. But we definitely need assimilation laws. But in order to do that successfully, we have to say, this is American culture. Have to assimilate to this. And the bare minimum, it should be Christian, and that would exclude paganism, and it would exclude Hinduism, Islam, even Jehovah's Witness and Mormonism,
Right.
as well. I'm not saying we can kick those people out. That's another conversation too, entwined in this. But I think those three really is immigration has to be lawful so far, is what we discuss. We have to define American culture, and there has to be assimilation laws. Those three are really important to get right for a better America, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, because it is founded on basic biblical principles, right?
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. People might be hearing this and say, these guys sound extremists, right? Like they want.
I don't think it's right I don't think it's wise anyway for a nation to be founded on basic biblical principles. We can't afford to do that. That's putting too much at stake. Is it horrible, like bad, that we were founded on basic biblical principles? No. But we have God's law, which is not a basic biblical principle. It is they're clear commandments for justice and righteousness. And when we don't institute the actual law, just principles from the law, and we reject the actual law, then God's law becomes a principle, and my principles become law. And now we're not doing God's law anymore. There's a reason why God didn't institute immigration law, because the state is not allowed to define who's a Christian and who's not. Don't give them that power. God knows the nature of humanity. He knows what's going to happen. If you give the state the power to define who's a Christian and who's not, then they will. And we know historically that's a terrible idea. The state should have nothing to say about who is a Christian and who's not, and what that definition is.
Want to kick everybody out that isn't like Christian. I wouldn't necessarily say that though. The thing for me, and maybe you can disagree or agree, I don't know. I'm talking about who we prioritize in letting them in, right? For me, the whole immigration situation is so bad right now that I don't even know if we should be letting anybody in, whether Christian or not. Just not because because I hate them or anything like that. I myself, I'm not first generation. Depending on who you ask, I'm third, fourth generation, or
I'm first generation,
second generation. I don't know. It's complicated. I'm not going to get into all that detail right now. For me, all I can tell you is, I've had grandparents, great grandparents that have served the United States. My grandfather, for example, fought in World War II and things like that. So we have a history, but had people live in Florida and New York, like grandparents and things like that. Although I myself was born in Puerto Rico. Again, that's why it's kind of like, well, how do you define this Heritage America thing? It's complicated, right? And so, like, at the end of the day, I'm like, an American is somebody that adheres to our values, right? Just like in Christianity, there's the concept of adoption. I want a Christian nation, right? And so if I want a Christian nation, well, it should be Christian in how it even adopts. Now, when a family adopts a child, they don't adopt everybody that wants to be adopted. They adopt according to what they can adopt, right?
Yep.
Well, it should be the same with a Christian nation, right?
There's no way for the magistrate to know, the leader of a nation, to be like, okay, we have too many people. How is he going to know that? What is he, like an overcrowding expert? How could you possibly know when the nation is full, especially a nation like America? How would you know? If this nation gets full, there is no way that any group of people could lead this nation as far as what they're asking for here. I'll be like, okay, like turn off the faucet. We got too many people. There is absolutely no way to control that, because all these people will be having children. And you would never know if you have too many people. You would just never know. There's no possible way to know when a nation has too many people, because the standards of living change from person to person. And you should see what they're doing in Tokyo, what they call an apartment and living space that they are absolutely content with. I wouldn't as an American. But that's not for the magistrate. That's none of the magistrate's business. What I'm content to live with and what my neighbor's content to live with. Give me a small corner of the room rather than living with a contentious wife, right? Or give me a small corner of the roof. You know, the magistrate cannot ever possibly have a bead or on when we have too many people and when immigration quotas have been met and blah, blah. There's no possible way to know. America is so huge. We've got plenty of room for 10 times the amount of people here, 20 times, 100 times the amount of people that live here right now. The only thing holding us back is regulation. Well, I mean, the thing holding us back is public idolatry. I mean, the promotion of idolatry. Righteousness exalts a nation, right? But the promotion of an embracement of a nation of idolatry in the nation is absolutely going to hold you back from being able to support a large population of people. I believe it says in Proverbs that the glory of a king is a large population. I think so, yes. But the glory of a king is in a large population of people, huh? Let me see here. Is that glory of a king? Did I? Let me see here if I can find that. Yes. Proverbs 14:28. In a multitude of people is the glory of a king, but without a people a prince is ruined. So what's a multitude? So the magistrate is not supposed to regulate how many people are allowed in the nation, how many people are too many, and when, you know, because then if you're going to say, okay, we got too many people, we need to stop letting people, then you have to inevitably say, you can't have any more children. You can't do it. And if we're a Christian nation, we're going to be reproducing so fast, no one is going to be able to control the population. So the immigration factor is going to be completely irrelevant. It's going to be completely irrelevant. Whether the population is increasing from the Christians having a lot of babies, which they will, or a lot of people coming into this nation, you can't control it. It's irrelevant. You won't be able to control it. The magistrate's not supposed to control it. God never set that up for the magistrate to control the population that way.
We bring in those that actually want to be here, not just take advantage of being here, but actually want to be part of this, that believe in what we believe, that agree with what, you know, the way of life that is American, right?
So my working definition of what it is to be an American is anyone who believes in the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Anyone who believes in that. That's what makes you American, right? It's a very simplistic definition, but I think it's historically accurate. I'm not saying that's the right thing for every citizen. I'm just saying to be American, what made you Americans unique? They all believed in the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I believe de Tocqueville's book bears that out. That's what he noticed, is that all these people have a very similar faith. They all believe in the right to life and liberty, pursuit of happiness. They knew nothing about the workings of the world. But when I asked them about their rights, they knew exactly where their rights began and where they ended. They knew the government's responsibility. I mean, they could talk your ear off about their their rights and their liberties. But they had no clue what was going on in Europe. They didn't care. And that was an observation by de Tocqueville. So I believe that what it is to be an American, not a Christian, what it is to be an American is to believe in the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what the war for independence was about. For most people, anyway. That's my working definition of what American is. So if you were going to say, well, we want people who come here who actually believe in what we're doing, that means anyone who believes in the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And most people who come here are looking for that.
Those are the people that we want here, and they can be adopted into this nation as well. I want to say one more thing, and I'm sorry, you're my guest, but I want to ask you about this. You mentioned a monoculture. Now, I've had a conversation with a friend of mine of something called protoculture, right? The idea is, well, there's several subcultures in America. You have Appalachia, you have like the French Cajuns, you have the Yankees, right? Like the Northerners. You have more like a West Coast, Oregon, Washington, California, sort of like surfer dude, culture. And so you have all these like subcultures. Plus you have some kind of multiculturalism in a sense where like you have people, who are Mexican American, third, fourth, fifth generation, because when the United States took over what used to be northern Mexico, which is now some of those states, you have people that were Mexican by blood now becoming part of America. And so there's all these subcultures. So we were talking about something called a protoculture, like the primary culture that unites all these different people, right? And then there's secondary things that create a subculture, but not a multiculture. Does that make sense?
You know what? It does. I think a better word for it, because you are right, because this does come into the conversation. Well, what do we do about these clear, North and South differences? Let's just start right there, right? East and West differences. But even if you look at countries, all countries experience that. Like my father, so I'm first generation here too. My father was born in Naples, Italy. Mm-hmm. And Naples was in the southern part of Italy. And there's differences too with their dialect. So all countries experience that, because I think what that is just going into is, how would you deal with that? Well, I think the substance of the culture would be Christian, but the customs would be different in how they express that. So if I go down south, right? Down south, there's a lot of Christians. I'm a Christian too. But clearly we're different in how we express and even our customs. Not just in our dialect, but just,
And that's what God's law allows for. It is your customs and your traditions would flourish in a nation with God's law. They would absolutely flourish. So, since God's law is simple and there's very few laws comparatively, this allows for a lot of custom and tradition to grow out of it, right? Where God's law is silent about a lot of things, right? And this requires custom and tradition to fill in where we feel God's law is silent, right? And God's law gives us everything that pertains to life and godliness, right? That's the claim there in 2 Peter chapter 1. Or his divine power, right, has given us everything that pertains to life and godliness. Okay, so we have everything we need for life and godliness, but we don't have everything we need for custom and tradition. Excuse me. We don't have all of our custom and traditions from God's law. We have everything we need for custom and traditions to flourish. So I agree with it here, and they go into it later. I want to get to it here. I'll let them talk. But custom and tradition would absolutely thrive and would be protected under God's law. So for those out there who love custom and tradition, trying to save it, trying to preserve it, God's law is the only way, because once you give man the authority to outlaw custom and tradition, just because, and like he says here, just because the politician who's in charge, of the Christian prince who's in charge at the time, comes from a background where he was persecuted by a certain people group, and now he's going to get rid of them because he doesn't like them, right? That's what happens. Once a certain people group gets into power and they're allowed to make rules, then they do make rules, and they suddenly, I mean, it's very weird, but they usually seem to target their perceived enemies, and those enemies are not always bad people. It's just their enemies, but that's what happens, and they target their customs and they target their laws, or excuse me, they target their customs and they target their traditions. That's what happens.
Our very way of life, but the substances we're both Christians, but our customs and how we express that are different. So I think that's actually a really good word. You said your friend made that up, or culture?
We didn't make it up. We were just sort of discussing the concept.
Okay,
And so we were like, we need a word for this.
that's
So
great.
I don't know who thought of it first, if it was me or him, but one of us said, like, what about proto culture, right? Like a primary culture. And we were like, yeah, like we need to have something that all Americans like can point to, you know, and say, hey, we believe in freedom and hard work. We're Christians. We love apple pie, that kind of thing. That thing that no matter where you go in the country, even though there's going to be differences, you can gather around and say, hey, we're part of this same American family, so to speak.
Yeah, that's
I think Christ, a nation identifying Christ as king of the nation and instituting his law, because if we don't institute his law, then he's not truly our king, right? Unless we institute his law. If he's king, that means he has a law. And if we're like, we want you to be king, but we don't want your law, then he's not truly king, is he? Right? That's a rejection of God. We need to get back to the place where God recognizes a nation recognizing him, right? They have not. It was 1 Samuel. They've not rejected you, but they've rejected me, that I should reign over them. How do we get back to the place where where he was reigning over us? Right? That's possible for God to reign over us as king. How do we do that? Well, we got to get back to his law, right? His law and his system of government, because that's what Israel did. They rejected his system. That was the first rejection there. They rejected his civil structure. We don't want God's civil structure anymore. We want a leader who's going to violate the civil structure and violate God's law to give us what we want. And that is what God recognized as a rejection of him. So to get back to an embracing of him, we got to get back to his system. If we want God to be truly our king, we can't just say, you're our king and our constitution, and then institute our own law.
that's probably a really good way to put it. A protoculture, a primary culture is what it is, because and that will get you to the same goal. We want to exclude culturalism.
Right. I mean, we'll take the tacos, right? Those are delicious.
And the pizza and everything.
And pizza, yeah.
Well, even that actually, the way we do pizza in America is different from how they do it in Italy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because we got to make it American. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we do. Americanize it.
And even that is like, well, you got deep dish over in Detroit, you got Chicago style, you got New York style. I mean,
Dave Portnoy knows all about that.
so I mean, protoculture, man. But here's what we don't want, right? And this is the point. We don't want the cartels. We don't want, or even something that is less obvious, right? Like, I'm Hispanic, right? And Hispanics have a really bad habit of just like, if you tell them 8 o'clock, they'll be there at 9 o'clock.
Oh, I know.
You know what I mean? Like,
I have friends.
That's first of all, that's not American, and most importantly, that's not Christian, right?
Yeah.
If you say you're going to be somewhere at a certain time, be honest.
Yeah.
So, that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, like, and I would even say the language, right? Because there's a lot of people. I live in Miami, okay? So I see a lot of people here, and I understand that it's hard to learn a new language. But when you're coming to a different nation, like, imagine going into somebody's house and insisting that they must do things your way.
Yes.
You get what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
Like, no, man, like you need to make an effort here. You know what I'm saying? I get it, but make an effort. You are in the United States, learn the language.
I actually have the belief that we should not try to do this bilingual thing where, how common is it to have, English and then right next to a sign or something in Spanish?
Right.
Right. we have to promote one language. If
I wonder about that sometimes. Obviously, the advantage of having one language obviously is apparent. But I think about Switzerland. Is the language percentage of Switzerland? I wonder about this. Switzerland has 4 official languages. Okay, German, French, Italian, and Romansh. Romansh? German is spoken by the largest percentage of the population at approximately 62%, followed by French at 23%, Italian at 8%, and Romansh. Wow, Romansh. At 0.5%. Wait, as languages. Not all Swiss people are perfectly trilingual. Okay, so it looks like they have 3 languages, but it says the AI overview says Switzerland has 4 official languages, like recognized by the government. Okay, well, I'm finding 2 different articles here. This is about Switzerland. Switzerland has 4 official national languages: German, French, Italian, and Romansh. Multilingualism is a fundamental aspect of Switzerland's identity and is enshrined in law. Okay? German is the most widely spoken language of the country, and almost 2/3 of the population speak more than one language at least once a week. Okay, but they all don't know it, right? How many people are we talking about here in Switzerland? Okay, so 9 million people, right? About the size of Sweden and Austria, 9 million people. Okay, and this isn't a huge point, but I mean, they have 4 official languages. It's a chaos out there. I don't know. I thought Switzerland was doing pretty well. I mean, of all the nations of Europe, that was probably in the top 2 or 3 that I'd want to live in. They have 4 official languages, so I wonder how that all plays in.
If you get rid of the language, there goes your communication, or people aren't going to really, find the need to, again, assimilate. Going back to the idea, assimilation would include the language for sure is one of the first.
I don't disagree necessarily. I mean, the language is important, but again, I look at Switzerland. They're not the only multilingual nation. I know there's Ireland's trying to get back to Celtic, like they're pushing Celtic big time. And I don't want to say that's good, but I'm just saying, I mean, how bad is it really?
First things that you do to assimilate, you have to learn how do they talk.
Right, absolutely. You cannot assimilate if you can't speak to each other.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just not going to be there. It's not going to happen. I will say this though, a lot, because I think you mentioned this too. Is you mentioned we don't want to kick everybody out. Really, what I'm talking about too, because you do have that big problem. What do you do with a society of 352 million people? There are radical people out there who just want to say we should just start over. Basically, I think that's ridiculous. That would destroy America. So I'm really talking about going forward, because
Right.
unfortunately the damage is done in many ways, and it is what it is. And if we do start having better immigration laws with Trump, it seems to be going that direction. Thank God. Hopefully it stays that way. It's going to take time though, and we might not see in our generation, but we have to start somewhere. And we have to start going in a better direction. And I think if we, start with these basic principles, it can work towards that step by step, where hopefully within my children's generation is better, then their generation is even better, and so on and so forth.
Right. Absolutely. Exactly. And again, like what I want to emphasize for those who are watching is, where are we getting these ideas from? Are we just thinking them up out of thin air? Like, no, like we're thinking biblically, right? Like, how do you handle the stranger and the foreigner? Well, you welcome them, you help them as much as you can, but again, you have a priority. The state has a priority to take care of the people living within its borders already. right? And so
I mean, under the eyes of God's law, the people living in the borders already have the same needs as the people who are immigrating to the land, right? In fact, I mean, God's law, man, it just kind of seems to prioritize the foreigner, doesn't it? I mean, the three groups that the God's law is constantly telling the magistrate, you know, plead the cause of the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner. Those are the guys. Those are the people you should be looking out for. I think biblical law makes the opposite point of what Jay is saying here. Like, I understand what he's saying here, but biblical law really tells the magistrate to be on the lookout to give justice to the foreigner because he's someone who would be taken advantage of. So I actually think the biblical law is making the opposite point of what Jay is saying here.
So the same way that, if you're a father and you take care of your family, well, you try to help everybody else out, but there's a list of priority. It's your wife and children first. Like Galatians 6:10 says, right? Like to try to help everyone, do good to everyone as far as it depends on you, especially those of the household of faith. Right, like there's a
right. That was said. I mean, that's said in a church context. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that the magistrate can do that too. However, that's not all that's said to the magistrate. You look up the widow and the orphan and all that kind of stuff, and I always go to this passage here on there. Jeremiah 22:3. Thus says the Lord, do justice and righteousness and deliver from the hand of the oppressor him who has been robbed. Do no wrong or violence to the resident alien. What version? Oh, I'm using the ESV. And do no wrong or violence to the resident alien, the fatherless, and the widow, nor shed innocent blood in this place. Let me just go to LSB here and look how many times the foreigner is lumped in with I'm using the wrong terminology here. Widow, foreigner. Maybe it's alien. No. Let's try stranger. No. Okay, so what is the terminology there in Jeremiah 22? Try this again here. Try Jeremiah. Jeremiah 22:3, that do justice and righteousness and deliver the one who has been robbed from the power of his oppressor, and do not mistreat or do violence to the sojourner. Oh, sojourner. Okay, widow, sojourner. Okay. All right, let's take a gander at this here real quick. Deuteronomy 10:18. He executes justice for the orphan in the widow and shows love for the sojourner by giving him food and clothing. Deuteronomy 14:29. And the Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance among you, and the sojourner, the orphan, and the widow. Deuteronomy 16:11. You should be glad before Yahweh your God, and your son, and your daughter, and your male and female slaves, and Levite who is within your gates, and the sojourner, and the orphan, and the widow. Deuteronomy 16:14 again. Deuteronomy 24:17. You shall not pervert justice due to a sojourner, an orphan, nor take a widow's garment in pledge. Again, in verse 19, when you reap your harvest in your field and have forgotten a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner, for the orphan, and the widow. When you beat your olive tree, you should not go over it. Okay, again, Deuteronomy 24, gather grapes. Deuteronomy 26, when you finish paying all the tithe, the produce in that third year, the year of tithing, then you shall give it to the Levite, to the sojourner, to the orphan, and the widow. So it's all over Deuteronomy. Cursed is he who perverts the justice due to a sojourner, orphan, and a widow. Psalm 94:6, they slay the widow and the sojourner and murder the orphans. Why are these three groups always together? Why? Right? If we should be prioritizing our own citizens, how much sense does this make? If the magistrate is always supposed to keep a special eye out for the widow, the orphan, and the sojourner. Jeremiah 7:6, if you do not oppress the sojourner, the orphan, or the widow, there again, 3 categories. Jeremiah 22:3, also do not mistreat or do violence to the sojourner, the orphan, or the widow. Ezekiel 22:7, they have treated father and mother with contempt within you. The sojourner they have oppressed in your midst, the fatherless and the widow they have mistreated in you. Zechariah 7:10, and do not oppress the widow or the orphan, the sojourner or the afflicted, and do not devise evil in your hearts against one another. Malachi 3:5, then I will draw near to you for judgment, and I will be a swift witness against the sorcerers, and against the adulterers, and against those who swear falsely, and against those who oppress the wage earner in his wages, the widow and the orphan, and those who turn aside the sojourner and do not fear me, says Yahweh of hosts. So I think the point is opposite of what, with respect to Jay again, I think the point is the opposite of what he's saying here. I think that's also evident in Job 29 too.
Priority there, and it's the same thing with all spheres, right? Whether the state, the church, or the family, right? There are certain priorities. The state has
a priority to look out for the widow, the orphan, and the sojourner. That's the priority that God gives them. Be on a special lookout to give them justice.
Priority to take care of its people first.
Ooh, again, I don't think that's biblical.
Yeah.
Not its people only, right? That's not what we're saying. We try to help, especially if we're going to be a Christian country. We have to try to help others as much as we can, but take care of home first. If home is in shambles, you have no business taking care of, how.
I agree if he's saying, taking care of home means doing the job that God has given you. Then home will be taken care of. I don't think the priority is necessarily taking care of home. I think the priority is every sphere being faithful to God. Right? We don't necessarily need to. The priority is not to take care of the church. The priority is not to necessarily take care of your family. The priority is not for the magistrate to necessarily take care of its citizens. The priority is for the church to be faithful to Christ and develop what that means from what Christ has told this church to do. The priority for the father and the mother is to be faithful to Christ and reverse engineer from what Christ has told them what their responsibilities are, and if their responsibility is to take care of the family, then they should prioritize that. But that has to come second to being faithful to Christ. And again, with the state, their job is nowhere given in Scripture to take care of us. That's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is to give us justice. That's it.
Over many millions of immigrants that want to come here, and they want to do it illegally. Many of them actually want to commit crime. I admit many of them don't, right? But if you don't do it,
it's irrelevant who commits the crime, is what I'm saying here. It's irrelevant who commits the crime. Whether you're immigrant or a citizen, if you commit the crime, you should be punished equally, right? But a citizen doesn't have to justify himself why he lives in America, right? You don't need to justify yourself why you live here. Neither should a foreigner. Completely irrelevant.
Organized, then inevitably those that want to commit crime will be here committing crime. And it has to be organized. It cannot be any other way.
Yeah.
That's the way that God has established all things, with order, with organization, that kind of thing.
Okay, so I just want to bring up another passage here. He's right about that. Obviously, if somebody feels safe in committing crimes here, then the people who want to commit crimes will come and live here, right? I feel safe breaking the speed limit. Am I a criminal? Let me see here. That means I'm going to break the speed limit. Okay, so one of the promises of God's law is that you can purge the evil from among you. So shall you purge the wicked from among you. Okay. Deuteronomy 21:21. Then all the men of the city shall stone him, and he will die. So shall you purge the evil from your midst. Okay, that's a possibility. You can purge the evil from your midst. Okay. God's law tells us how to purge the evil from the midst. We can't stop the evil from coming here and sojourning among us, right? Because we'll never be able to recognize it. The only way we can recognize is that when it starts to act out and break God's law publicly, right? That's how we recognize it. And God's law equips us its citizens, its magistrates, its people. God's law equips it with ways on how to put the evil from to purge the evil from your midst, right? And all Israel will hear of it and fear. Okay, that means that the sojourner is going to hear of it and fear as well. So that's how people who come to this nation are going to know: am I really welcome in here? Because what they did to the last guy is something that I want to do. I mean, and what the last guy did is something that I want to do, but they really punish him for that. So if I'm going to try and do the same thing as him, I'm going to be treated the same way. That should be true for the immigrant and the citizen.
So,
Yep.
I'm sorry, man.
No, that's okay.
I've been talking a lot, even though you're the guest. I apologize.
Yeah, it's fine. I was gonna say, so that's like a really good argument to get people to think about this logically and biblically, with their own homes. I take for example the wall, right? Build that wall. People were against that. How could you do this? This is awful. But you look at
just let everyone know, I have no problem with building a wall. I have no problem with the magistrate defending and the people defending their borders. I got no problem with that. I do have a problem with instituting laws that are outside of God's law.
our homes, we have doors. Not only do we have doors, we have we have locks on our doors.
Right.
A lot of people, they have fences. Celebrities especially do this.
Right.
Why do we do this? Is it because we hate people who are out there? No, because we love ourselves. That's okay. We do love ourselves. You should love your neighbor as yourself. I care for myself. I don't want to be murdered. But if you have family, it's all the more, you love your family. So I'm not going to let 10 people into my house. That would destroy my household. I have a wife. I have a daughter that I have to think of. I wouldn't even let somebody sleep over my house unless they're a family member or a very close friend, because again, I love my my wife and kid. And so if we can even start there, thinking like we don't even act like this with our house.
Right. You've been given that authority, right, to do with your private property what you want to do. Christ says, is it not my right to do with my property what I want to do with it, right? When giving out how much money I want to give to each person, right? Christ really nails home the principle of private property and ownership. However, the state has not been given that authority. We're not the property of the state. The country is not the property of the state. They're not allowed to make up new rules. They're only allowed to enforce God's law. God's law doesn't punish immigrants who don't report to them. So we can't compare these different spheres that have been given different authorities to accomplish different ends and say, well, since I don't want people who I don't know in my house, that means daddy government is allowed to do the same thing. The logic falls apart.
Our house is not globalism, right?
Right.
And our house is not multiculturalism either. This house serves Jesus. Nobody can stay over unless they're very, close knit, family member or friend with us. Even then, there's limits. I have a door. I have a lock on it. We should treat our nation like that. Nations are an extension of the household. Our households have borders.
Disagree completely.
They have laws, and those laws include who is allowed to come into your home, when and where, and you set the rules for who is allowed to stay and who is not allowed to stay. And nations, again, are extensions of this.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So I want to change gears here for a second.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about this already, but what would you say are some of the extreme positions that Christians can take in regards to immigration if they move in the direction that you and I are going in, right? Like where when is too far, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
The Joel Webbins of this world, the CJ Angles of this world.
Yeah, sure.
Naming names,
And
baby.
I talked about this too. We call I call them. I don't know what you call them. I like to call them the dissident right. Really, they call themselves the dissident right. Dissident means like they're departing. Just for the viewers, they're departing from like as they call it, the normie view, the normal,
right.
Standard conservative view. So they're the dissident members of that group. They're challenging, not really just so much liberalism, but they're even challenging the meta narratives of conservatism. So I call them the dissident Reich as a play on words because they tend to like the Third Reich a lot.
Right, they do.
But they go too extreme. So what they want to do is, and I honestly, I just want them to think about this. And I said this too.
I think what he's about to say here is insightful. I think he's 100% right.
To a few of them. The extreme is they want to define American culture as if we're Germany or as if we're Japan. Where if you look at Japan and Germany, or even Ireland, like any country, they're not like us. That is, America exists as an anomaly. Now, it wasn't always like that. I will admit that, but currently now, we're not like Japan, where if somebody says I'm Japanese, I'm not only assuming their nationality, I'm also assuming their ethnicity. And for me, that's one and the same. They usually are by blood, Japanese, and also by nationality, Japanese. Of course, there are exceptions, but that's the norm. Right. America's not like that. Like, I'm American, you're American, but you're born or you're born in Puerto Rico, you said, right?
Yep.
So my father was born in Italy. So clearly we're both Americans, but it's not, again, like the Japanese person where the ethnicity and nationality.
And my question here is, what makes them Americans? Because I still contend that, a person from Lithuania, Zimbabwe, a person from Zimbabwe who doesn't know the language and comes here, yet believes that everyone should have the right to life and liberty and pursuit of happiness, and he knows how to articulate that. This is completely unlikely that someone from Zimbabwe, but it's still within the realm of possibility. He can, articulate what it means to, and he basically agrees with the framers that, everyone should have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness within the Christian context. He is more American than the hot dog eating, baseball loving, stat quoting, football game attending, Friday night light, hometown hero, fair skin, blonde hair, blue eyes with a Brooklyn accent, American who's a communist. The person from Zimbabwe is more of an American than the communist. That's what I maintain, and that's where the unity from America comes into play. Is that it is a collection of people who believe in the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's one of the things that made America as great as it was.
Is the same. And people are trying to say that we should define America as the WASP, which is white Anglo-Saxon people. That is, we go all the way back.
I actually think it's white Anglo-Saxon Protestant there.
The settlers here came from the UK, England, I should say, or Britain. They were Protestants, and they came here, and they were white, Protestants. So those are Americans. That's what we should find it in. And the reason why they want to do this is because they hold to the ideology, whether they admit it or not, of blood and soil, right. Where your heritage with your blood, your DNA, and also your land is a part of you, and that's important. We should preserve that. So they want to trace it all the way back to these people. The problem is if you do that, and you say, okay, only these are Americans, we need to kick everybody out. Well, with a country of 352 million people, if you did that, you would destroy America. Like, you would have nothing left because the majority of people are not able to trace their ancestry to those people. Not even the people who even push it, I'm sure. Like,
Let me look that up, because I remember there was an astonishing number. Trace their origin to the Mayflower. It is estimated that 35 million Americans can trace their ancestry back to the passengers of the Mayflower. 35 million Americans. Let's see. It's 10%. Can trace their ancestry back to the Mayflower.
Like, I'm doubtful that the majority of people who even push this view from the dissident right camp could trace their lineage back to those original settlers. And if you did that, it's ironic because they say they love America. Well, if you did that, you would just destroy America. What would we be? We'd be starting over from ground zero, literally. So that's the extreme view. I don't want to hurt America. I don't want to destroy America. I think, unfortunately, whether we did have bad immigration laws, which we clearly had. I think it's undeniable. We have had horrible immigration laws, starting predominantly in the 60s, where it really was a lot of big changes after the war. I do believe in the post-war consensus, even though I'm not a dissident Reich. but I would just argue that they have the wrong view of the post-war consensus. But that's the extreme view where it would just destroy America, and that is not loving America. That's doing the opposite. That's actually being hateful to America. And a lot of these guys do. They generally hate America, and they want to define us as a Fourth Reich.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I find the whole, because you have Corey Mahler, right, and those types of people who are just straight up like, yeah, we just want whites. And that's it, right? If you're, he says horrendous things, even like, oh, blacks can never be true Americans, or blacks cannot be American, like ridiculous stuff, right? Then you have a bit more moderate, I guess you could say, the Joel Evans of the world, where they're like, well, third generation, right? Once you've been here 3 generations, then you can be American. The problem with that, though, is first of all, it's subjective and it's unbiblical. Again, if we are going to be a Christian nation, then we need to do things the Christian way. It doesn't mean that we adopt everybody, but who we do adopt, we don't give them some kind of 3-generation test to make sure, hey, now that you've been here for a while, now you can be an American. You don't do that with a kid. Hey, listen, our great-grandchildren that come from you, they will have our last name, but not you and not your children. Like, that's ridiculous, right? Like, that's not the way it works. Now, I understand to some extent why they say stuff like that is because they want people to really buy into American culture. But again, if you adopt somebody into the culture and, like you're saying, you have laws, assimilation laws, then guess what? Those that actually pass those tests and actually assimilate will stick around. And you would have accomplished what they're trying to accomplish by giving 3 generations anyway.
Well, and the problem is too, and these guys don't realize it. Like I generally believe these guys are just trying to sound based. I don't care about sounding based.
Sure.
People call me liberal, medieval, as we talked about pre-show, as they called you the same way. Sounds like I don't care about just saying things just to sound based and like I'm a conservative. And I think a lot of these guys are doing that because they're not actually thinking. Because the fault of that thinking is we should just be white. That is a 21st century conception.
Yes.
White is not a catch-all term for everybody who's just this one certain skin color.
Yes.
And the proof is that if you look at world history, the Italians did not consider the Greeks as their same kind of people.
Mm-hmm.
And the people in Ireland did consider this. Like, my father, again, going back to him, when he came over here, there was, a racial tension and a divide was at a higher peak than it is now. And the Italians kept their own people, and the Irish kept their own people. They didn't like each other. They both called each other names, even though they were Catholic. They just kept to themselves. And again, they didn't like each other. They wanted to preserve their culture, their ethnicity, and they would intermarry with the people of their own nationality and ethnicity. Where these people today, they're using white as if that these divides don't exist anymore. But if we're going to be consistent, and we're going to try to say, well, I'm just believing what everybody prior to the 19th century believed. Okay, well then Italians aren't Irish, and Germans aren't Italians, and so on and so forth. Just because you have the same color of skin doesn't mean you're the same people. And they're making that clearly erroneous logic, thinking that it is.
Yep.
But again, like they're not thinking right. Like they're just trying to sound base and trying to say the thing that's going to give them the most clicks and start the most controversy.
Right. Agree with him here. I mean, it's a great observation. What the nationalists are not pushing for, they don't realize this. They're not pushing for nationalism. They're pushing for tribalism. Because once you kick out what you think is a problem, the differences don't stop there. Because again, there are Christian nationalists who are German oriented. We got to go back to Germany. Why? Because, we came from England. Where did England come from? Well, they came from Germany, so we got to go back to Germany. And there's people who are like, no, we just need to go back to the founding of America. And there's people who are like, no, we got to go back to England, right? And, it's not going to stop. If you look at the Baltic states and the wars that they fought, for the reasons that they fought them, you got to be like, are you freaking kidding me? You guys are all the same. You speak all the same language. You all look the same. You all sound the same. You dress the same. But this guy was born, 2 miles away from me on the wrong side of the border, and he voted for like somebody I don't like, so let's go to war. The reason that they fought each other was completely ridiculous and insane. And you might look at them, they're all ethnically the same. I mean, there's the differences. Yeah, there's differences, but are they important? No, they're not really important. It's just you were born over there, and your great grandfather did this to my great grandfather or something like that. And you're like, you got to be joking me. People don't. The differences is what the Christian nationalists don't realize, and I think is what he's saying here. The differences don't stop once you kick out all the people that you want to kick out. You think you're gonna be like, okay, the differences are gone. Now we're all the same. You're gonna be like, nope, we're gonna find more things. We're gonna find way more things to be like, you're different from me, and you need to leave. It's not gonna stop. You're promoting tribalism, and that's what the Christian nationalists are doing. And that was one of the great things about America, was that we did develop this sense of, yeah, I know you're Italian, and I'm Irish, and I know that used to mean something, but it doesn't really mean anything anymore as far as the way I treat you. Yeah, you still have your culture and your heritage, but I'm not mad that you have that culture and heritage about it. I'm not offended by it. You get together with your family and you eat, spaghetti, and you sing this song, and that for a while used to be offensive to the Irish. The Irish don't care anymore, and you can still have their culture and heritage, but you don't have to be bugged by anybody else's culture and heritage anymore. And that was something that was great about America. But the way the Christians nationalists are saying is that we need to be bugged, that other ethnicities and cultures and heritages are coming in here. We need to be bugged by that. We need to be bugged by that. We need to be alarmed that there's people coming in here who are speaking a different language. That needs to be a problem for us. All the while ignoring the actual injustice, what God is bugged by, but what God finds offensive. We need to kind of put that on the back burner and say, we can't take care of that now. We don't need to worry about that now. What we need to be worried about is that there's different cultures and ethnicities coming in here. We won't have a nation in 10 years or however many years, and they start to sound like climate change alarmists after a while. But I want to say thanks to Providence Perspective for these guys for this content here. You can find this a biblical view of immigration on Providence Perspective with Reformed Rican on YouTube, and go check out their channel. Some level-headed guys. I contend that some of their reasoning is not biblical when it comes to immigration, because a lot of it's not God's law. It's 21st century American immigration political theory. And I say it respectfully, but I believe that's what they're promoting and not necessarily God's law. So thanks everybody for listening to this episode of the Think and Reform podcast. We will see you guys next time. And remember, my friends, think and reform.